If I were farming, I would be planning now my herbicide strategy for the crop rotation I have coming in place, and we're going to be planting stew in a very short period of time. And why not plan today and get that all worked out of what herbicides I'm going to use? Do they require mitigation because of endangered species or potential threat to those species? And am I located in an area where I have to have specific setbacks either for spray drift or for runoff? I would check on Bulletins Live 2. You can just Google that and go for it.
What is Bulletins Live 2?
That is from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, Bulletins Live 2. You can Google that, and you can go to that site. You can put in the location. You can put in the month of application you intend to apply a pesticide and the EPA registration number of that pesticide. And then it will actually show if there are any endangered species in the region in which you would have to have a setback for.
So that's the key, is finding that information and then doing whatever they need to do. Probably got to make some records of this too.
Yes, that's one of the things you'd want to do, is make record of this, and then you would run the calculation. If it was based on spray drift, you would use things like adjuvants that would minimize drift, your coarser nozzles to put larger droplets to get down to the ground as quickly as possible and stay out of the atmosphere. You could even use something like a hooded sprayer if you choose. When it comes to runoff mitigation, a number of conservation methods would be the case to minimize the setback. If you see a setback distance, you can actually mitigate it to zero by implementing specific conservation practices that are listed on a conservation worksheet.
And you probably got to put something on there about wind speed and temperature and those types of things.
Those types of records are already in place about wind speed, temperature, time of application, product, and yes, farmers have already been accustomed to that. So it adds another layer of management, but I think it's one in which we could start now planning for.
Okay. Could somebody, if they weren't doing something like this, if they weren't doing the right thing, they could probably get in some real trouble?
I think that there's always risk involved without compliance. And of course, this is a regulation from the United States Environmental Protection Agency, so compliance is expected. If there would be a complaint about an application, that complaint process would be driven in where an inspector would come out and then review the process that's been going on with the spray records, as well as if they used a product that required the setbacks, they would investigate that as well. So that's part of the process. It's been part of the process for a long time. Farmers have a very strong ethic for compliance, and that's something that we think is very good about Illinois.
And in Illinois, there's a lot of complaints that are registered too.
There have been. Of course, anyone can complain about a product with the Department of Agriculture, but then they would send out an inspector, and what they find is a lot of farmers are doing the job in which they intended, and that's the best resolution, is that having concerns, reporting them, that may be one thing, but the investigation and then working with the Department of Agriculture to show how the ethic of compliance is achieved is very, very important on each farmer's basis.
Now, if we have a commercial applicator do this, we, the farmer, is still responsible, is that right?
Yeah, the applicator is going to have some responsibility because they're applying, but the landowner is the critical component in this. So farmers and landowners work well together if they're in tenant relationships, and that's something that's extremely important, is that we continue to comply. So the product is applied by the retail applicator. They are professionals, licensed applicators, restricted use pesticide product holders as well, so that's something that would be an advantage, I think, in working with your pesticide applicator and an ag retail location.
Now, this is the herbicide strategy, which impacts weeds, which may be a food product or a home of an endangered animal species. But after this coming up is going to be insects and then fungicides.
Yes, there's all kinds of classifications. That was part of the settlement of a lawsuit to review the impact on endangered and threatened species, whether they be plant, insect, or animal. And so these strategies, herbicide was the first to be completed, insecticide strategy will be coming up next, and then we go down the list, as you pointed out, fungicide, rodenticide. And the important component of this is that we continue to have products that protect us from pests. And we do have to control pests at certain times, otherwise populations really get to be a point of nuisance. They could be infestations of insects inside a home, in locations we don't want. We could go down the list of challenges. What we find important is equally important to make sure that we apply specifically in areas where they meet economic thresholds for weeds and insects, and that if the pest becomes overrun, where it would absolutely infest a house or be troublesome to our food supplies, we would have to address it there then as well. But those are procedures we work through, and it's very important to work with educational institutions like universities as well.
Now, a few days ago, we heard the White House saying, well, we're going to delay all of these things about endangered species. But really, as you said, it came from a court.
Yes, this is a settlement from a lawsuit that was filed back in 2011, and the settlement process began in 2022. So we would foresee this continuing to move forward. This is not as much of an administrative process as it is a settlement to a lawsuit, and the agency is going to be required to move this forward. It's going to take over the next 10 years to get all the products reviewed. We have a lot of them in the marketplace, and the reason for that is that resistance is something that nature continues to challenge us with. So you can't use the same product all the time on the same pest. You've got to have a toolbox full of different tools so you can rotate them and make sure that the effectiveness of managing pests stays in the front.
You really have to keep up with this all the time, just like you do the markets every day.
Yes, you do. You got to stay up on it and read and be close to informed sources.